genes.
Dates in the Bible don't quite match the marriage certificate. Uh-oh.
And welcome, America, to America's family history show, Extreme Genes, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. We got a loaded show for you today. First of all, coming up here in just a few minutes, we're going to be talking to our friends over at Ancestry.com. Krista Cowan's going to be back on because they're done. The 1950 census. Yeah, you got to hear how they've put this whole thing together to index the entire census, all 150 some odd million people, in just a few days, and now how they've checked the accuracy. I mean, it's just going to be a great visit. Plus, Ancestry has some new announcements about new databases that are out, too, you're going to want to hear. And then later in the show, Michelle Carroll is here, a researcher at Legacy Tree, talking about the 3 tribes of the Cherokees and lots of other stuff. Hey, and don't forget to sign up for our weekly Genie newsletter, where you can get past and present shows, links to great articles you'll appreciate as a genealogist, and a blog from me each week. It's absolutely free, and you can sign up at extremegenes.com or on our Facebook page. Right now, it's off to Boston, Massachusetts, my favorite Red Sox fan, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. It's David Allen Lambert. Hello, David.
Hello, and how's my favorite Mets fan doing these days?
You know, this year, pretty darn good. Thank you very much.
A little bit better than my team in Beantown, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So what's new with you these days?
Well, I actually got a box from a cousin with pictures in it, and who knew, but there were several in there I had never seen before. Of 2 of my uncles who served in World War II, and one was a professional boxer for a time, and I'd never seen a picture of him in his boxing pose. But here was one signed to his brother, my half-uncle, back on January 2nd, 1941. It was a great picture. I was real pleased with it.
Well, that's always great when you find photographs. There's a great article I read talking about collecting photographs and discovering lost pictures by Patty Taylor in the Beaumont Enterprise, where she was talking about going through family letters. And while they were reading them, photos fell out. Well, they tucked the pictures into the letter and never had them framed, so they didn't know they had these. And those photos are over 80 years old.
Wow. Don't you love that when you open something old like that and a little surprise comes out? It's like Cracker Jacks.
What I love is learning new things, and I think that people are embracing online education all the time now, especially with YouTube. I have a lot of YouTube channels that I like, but there's one for the National Archives in Ireland. I have probably watched all of their videos because it's like a free course from Ireland. Now, the National Archives of Ireland, you figure to be thousands of people that tune into their YouTube channel.
Right.
Now, they're under 400.
What?
So, yeah. So our listeners, if you get some Irish roots, go to the National Archives of Ireland website for YouTube and give them a little love from Fish and Dave.
I'm just wondering what these Irish people are doing here. It's less than 400? That's insane.
Well, it's because I think so many people emigrated to America. So maybe we need American Irish to sign up.
There you go.
You know, on that same side of the pond, I'm going to talk about a cemetery that was found in the 1960s. That cemetery is over 6,000 years old. It was found over in Normandy. Well, old bones and new technology means finding out that cemetery had 19 skeletons, but they're all related. It was a patrilineal society in this cemetery and probably had a common great-great-grandfather. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And since you probably have Norman roots, and I have Norman roots, they may have found our ancestor, which would take the rest of the season to say the greats to go that far back.
Absolutely.
Well, the next story is a little smelly, but I think you'll enjoy it. And this is a news and science article about smellscapes and how they're using old artifacts to bring out smells from the past. Now, Ramses, when he was the pharaoh of Egypt, one of his jobs was to rid the land of the smell of the fish and the birds and the smelly swamps off the Nile. Well, how about if you find in an archaeological site an incense burner? You normally would wash it off, put it in a museum. Now they're taking that burnt remains, and is it frankincense or myrrh or some sort of a wood or flower petal? A smell from the past can now be realized today. You know, my ancestor's brain might have been bigger than your ancestor's brain.
It's
At least
very
that's what
possible.
science is telling us.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, since we have common ancestors, 100 generations ago, chances are it's our ancestor's brain.
True.
And they're finding out now, based on skulls and the analysis of cranial fossils, that our ancestors had larger brains than we do now. It's all that time playing video games. I knew it was going to happen.
Exactly.
You know, before I wrap up, I want to actually give a birthday wish and a call out for people to send cards to a 98-year-old veteran. On June 2nd, Horace Hamilton of Caldwell, Texas, who is a veteran from Pearl Harbor, will be 98 years young. He's asking for birthday cards, and you can send him a card to Horace Hamilton, P.O. Box 1281, Caldwell, Texas 77836. He is one of the last Pearl Harbor survivors and maybe the last crew member from the USS Phoenix that made it out of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, when he was 17 years old.
Wow. That's a great story. What a great thing to do, too. 98 years young. Congratulations to him.
Well, everyone, that's all I have from Beantown this week. Don't forget, if you use the coupon code EXTREME, you can save $20 on AmericanAncestors.org here in Boston. And I'll talk to you in a little bit for Ask Us Anything.
All right. Great stuff, David. Thank you so much. Oh, we got a lot of ground to cover today. First of all, later on in the show, we got Michelle Carroll joining us from Legacy Tree Genealogist. She's a researcher there. You know, she's one of these people who's been through all the things we read about, right? She found out that she had some Native American ancestry, and then she had a DNA surprise. So she's kind of an expert in all of these things, and she's going to share with you some information about the Cherokees, the three tribes, the Trail of Tears, researching these lines if you should find that you happen to have those in your family tree. And coming up next, of course, Krista Cowan is going to be joining us from our friends over at Ancestry.com, our great sponsors, talking about the 1950 census again. Big news came out about that this past week, and you're just not going to believe how quickly they have indexed this whole thing and how they did it. You're going to want to hear all about it. It's coming up next, starting in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
Hey, Genies. As we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow Genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Hey, Genies, Ancestry now has an exclusive partnership with PhotoMine, the leader in photo scanning and archiving. What does this mean to you? Well, imagine inheriting an old photo album and you want to digitize all the images. Up until now, you'd have to remove the pictures, place them in a scanner, crop them, and perhaps use Photoshop to improve them. Now, by using these amazing PhotoMine tools from Ancestry, you can use your phone to take a picture of an entire page from your album. The tools will automatically separate and crop each picture, improve focus, and restore color or colorize your images. Then you can assign which picture goes to which person on your tree. If you've been waiting years to get around to the tedious project of scanning your old albums, it's been worth the wait. No more pulling your photo albums apart and trying to reinsert the pictures back in proper order. No more tearing of your old photos while removing them from those so-called magnetic albums of the 1970s. Sign in to Ancestry through their mobile app to try it out. And welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, and it is always a joy to talk to my good friend Krista Cowan from over at our sponsors at Ancestry, because these guys have been like newsmakers this year. Everything they touch is incredible, and you got more big news going on right now, Krista.
We do. In fact, I know you and I have spoken a little bit about the 1950 census and how Ancestry had those images downloaded from the National Archives in less than 48 hours. We immediately got to work on the handwriting recognition technology, brand new proprietary artificial intelligence, so that we could index those 153 million names in that census as quickly as possible.
Well, you had practice runs with this stuff.
Oh, for sure.
You had to make up things in different people's handwriting to see how it worked. And it was fantastic, at least in theory. And then when you put it to work, how long did it take you to do all of that work?
The hard work and prep paid off. We got the whole thing completely run through handwriting recognition in 9 days.
In 9 days.
Yeah.
Now think about that. Back 10 years ago, 2012, we got the 1940 census and everybody's talking about the war. And it took how many months at that point?
Almost 6 months to get the full
6 months.
Indexed. Yeah.
So we went from 6 months to 9 days over the course of a single decade. So I'm thinking, like when the 1960 census comes out in 2032, we're going to be looking at about 35 minutes. Something like that. Because your IT people are so ridiculously amazing. Now, I know that is out now, and I've been looking through it. I'm finding things. I'm even getting the shaky leaf hints now from the 1950 census that I really wouldn't have come to expect this fast. I mean, it's ridiculous. Some of this, of course, you're going through and you're double checking, and this is that partnership with Family Search. How's that working?
Yeah, so we delivered that completed computer-generated index to Family Search on April 9th. They started reviewing and curating that index. Now, we've indexed every field on the census, and so they're reviewing field by field through that whole thing. And the quality that they were discovering was so high that that's why we went ahead and just published the early version of this computer-generated index. Now, we did publish it because we wanted people to be able to make discoveries as quickly as possible.
Right.
We only published a few fields. So name, location, gender, age, marital status, birthplace. All the rest of the fields are still going through that review process. So as Family Search finishes each state, we will then publish that completed state and replace that portion of this early index.
But you're talking about the indexing of that, because if you can just go to the original page, you can see those things as they are originally. So
absolutely,
there's really nothing much you're being held back from at this point, other than the fact that maybe somebody's going to try to interpret handwriting that you might not be able to understand and get another opinion, basically. But you can still look at the original and find all that information yourself, which is absolutely insane.
Yep, it is. Super exciting. It is.
So the 1950 census is obviously the big story of the year, and it's going to be for any year that ends with a 2 forevermore. But you guys have a lot of other things going on other than the 1950 census, and it's important stuff. Let's talk about, first of all, what's going on with the Ancestry DNA app.
Yeah, so Ancestry for the last several years has had two different mobile apps. With the Ancestry app, where you could access your tree and a little bit of search features and capabilities. And then we have the Ancestry DNA app, where the DNA match list, it's where you could activate your kit, it's where you could check your ethnicity updates every year. Well, we're in the process of retiring that Ancestry DNA app, and we've moved all those DNA features over into that one single Ancestry mobile app, and it's available for both iOS and Android devices.
So it's available for anything at this point. So that's great. One-stop shopping. We love that.
Yeah.
Love being able to sit at a restaurant, talking DNA. Well, let me show you something here and pull that right up. It's great also to just be able to have that and the tree in the same place and be able to mess with it. That is so much fun. You hate to hear, oh, well, we're getting rid of an app. No. We're making this better. Let's talk about the databases you guys have been coming out with lately.
Yeah, you'd think that 1950 census was taking up all of our time and attention, but I did mention we indexed that in 9 days. So we have been able to give some attention to some other records, including we have over the last about 2 years been publishing little bit by bit the Mexican Catholic Church records, and we just completed that entire collection, 13 million records dating back to 1641, going up through the 1970s. So anybody with heritage in any of the states in Mexico should be able to make some discoveries there now.
Wow. Well, you consider South and Central America and how many people are all over the world now from there.
Yeah.
Your Guatemalan records are just unbelievable.
Right.
And Mexico, of course, is impacting so many people here in the United States now to be able to find some of the stuff there. It's so easy. And for people who are professional researchers or like to help their friends, just knowing those databases are available, just go to the card catalog on Ancestry.com and you can see what's there all the time. I'm always making discoveries. It's like, oh, you got that? I love hearing about these databases. What else you got?
Yeah, so we've also been publishing some records from some of the Baltic states. So Latvia, we just published, updated the database for births, marriages, and deaths, now has 28 million records in it. And then some Estonian census records, about almost 7.5 million records from there. So again, lots of people in those former Soviet bloc countries that immigrated to the United States in 1980s and early 1990s, wanting to connect back with some of those family history records in those countries. Those are now available.
Would you agree with me that Eastern European research traditionally has really been kind of a nightmare?
It's difficult, first of all, because the Soviet bloc locked down so many of those records, but then also there was a lot of record loss during both world wars. And so whatever records exist, it's always really satisfying to see them discovered and then made available.
Sure. And then, you add that with DNA and you start finding relatives over there and putting this all together. I mean, we're really at the point now where we're doing what even 5, 7, 10 years ago, you would just consider pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the same thing happening in Asia.
Yeah. Asian records are super interesting because they have kept brilliant records. In China, they're called jiaopu. They have similar things in Taiwan and Japan. So really great records. The challenge with their records is that for centuries, they've kept them, but they've only listed the men. So no wives, no daughters.
Well, except in Japan, right, where they put all the families together since 1872.
Yes.
The challenge there is the privacy issues that are going on with it. But still, nonetheless, it's almost like a census, except it's constantly being maintained. It's not every 10 years or anything like that. So you get the births and the deaths and the marriages. What other database do you got coming out right now that we'd be interested in?
Well, the last couple things I just want to talk about are the newspaper indexes. I know we've talked about those before. Ancestry has indexed the obituaries and marriages found on newspapers.com, and we continue to update the U.S. indexes. We've also continued to update the Canadian indexes, and then now added brand new the UK and Ireland newspaper indexes.
It's really spreading out, isn't it, as far as the newspapers go? There are two databases that I just think are the things that cause people's heads to explode: newspapers and DNA. And we obviously saw a decline in growth in DNA testing for a while, but I've noticed a pickup in that of late. Is that just my observation, or is there anything to that? Do you know?
I don't know the overall numbers, but I know anecdotally my experience has been the same as yours, which is just when you think you've exhausted all of the second cousins that you have that might possibly exist in the world, a new one pops up on your DNA match list. One came up on mine this week. So
Right. Because I do see more and more information still coming in. It's like, wow, people are still testing all over the world.
They are.
Maybe more people are even starting to put their trees in there to help us try to see maybe where that connection is. And then in the newspaper things too, I mean, just a few months ago, I found this whole set of newspapers on newspapers.com from Brooklyn, New York, that talked about the bowling leagues in New York City in 1879, and learned that my great-grandfather and great-grandmother were part of the men's and women's leagues, and it gave their scores every week and talked about their teams and how they were doing, and their names were listed. And I was just like, well, you just don't get any better than this stuff. Because newspapers is, I mean, what do they do? It's stories. And that's exactly what we're looking for, obviously, in family history. So it's great to see that even though we've gone through this tidal wave of DNA test results, that's still coming in at numbers that we couldn't have imagined back, say, in 2010 or 2012. And now we're finding that there are still more and more and more and more and more newspapers out there that haven't been digitized yet. Do you have any idea how many more are out there, say, just in the United States, Krista?
Oh, gosh, I don't. I know. Wow. Yeah. I just know it's interesting. If you go to newspapers.com, they have a little ticker in the top corner of the page about how many pages of newspapers they've digitized, and it's in the hundreds of millions.
Right.
And sometimes that number rolls very quickly as they add new pages, page after page.
We're going to get to 1 billion at some point.
Oh, easily.
But, this is the good news, is there are still stories to be found about ancestors back there that you never imagined you would find. And it's what just keeps everybody going. It's great fun. Well, congratulations, Krista, on all that's going on over at Ancestry. Thanks for coming on and sharing that. Look forward to checking out the new databases and talking to you again real soon about what you got going on.
Yeah.
And coming up next, do you suspect you have Native American ancestry? Michelle Carroll thought she did. It was passed through her family for years till she got a DNA surprise. She'll explain that whole story coming up and tell you how you can research your Cherokee lineage should you suspect you have some. Yeah, there's some great records out there. She'll give you the whole story coming up in about 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. And welcome back to Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And on the line with me today from our sponsors over at Legacy Tree Genealogists, it's researcher Michelle Carroll. It was very interesting to talk to Michelle. She's in Washington State. And before we got going with this, we were talking about some different areas of research that she's an expert in that we could talk about on the show. And she brought up DNA surprises, talked about the 3 tribes of Cherokees, the Trail of Tears. And then I kind of found out, Michelle, that you kind of have all these things wrapped up into one big story of your own.
I do, absolutely. It's great to be on your show. Thank you for having me today. Yeah, I would love to tell you more about my Cherokee heritage. I grew up actually learning about it. My grandpa always told me stories about it and always heard about him growing up down in Oklahoma. And then at the age of about 45, I took a DNA test, and lo and behold, like I'm sure has happened to a lot of people, there was no Cherokee there.
Ooh.
And so that was a big surprise.
Sure.
So it turns out that my grandpa is Cherokee, but I'm not his biological granddaughter.
Interesting. But the thing was, though, that doesn't really change your expertise in it, because you've been in it since childhood. You've known the history, you've known the heritage, and that's still gone into your family as a result of that. And you've become quite an expert in Cherokee research. So let's talk about what some of that has engaged you in and some of the stories you've come up with and some things people might not know about that kind of background and heritage.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about the Cherokee background and all the research that I've done. So long before I found out that Cherokee wasn't actually part of my genetic inheritance, I had done a lot of research into my Cherokee family. My grandfather actually has a cousin who's done a lot of Cherokee writing. So I've read a lot of stories about that part of my family in Oklahoma and knew that they'd come across on the Trail of Tears. So I did some research into that. The biggest part of trying to trace your ancestors past the Trail of Tears is just following those Cherokee rolls backwards in time. And those are kind of like a census that other people would be looking at. You know, the rolls are basically a census of the tribe.
And how often would they take this census?
So there were several of the censuses taken, and the earliest ones that were before the Trail of Tears were taken by the U.S. government. And if you look at them, a big part of that was they were looking at where the tribes lived, and they were actually recording some of the gold and some of the metals and different things that were on the land that they wanted access to, which is part of the reason that the Trail of Tears happened. Which roll you look at depends on where your ancestors lived and when they were on the Trail of Tears and where they moved to. As you mentioned, there are actually 3 Cherokee tribes that are recognized federally. And I'm a member of Cherokee Nation, which is the largest. But there's also the United Kiowa Band of Cherokee Indians, and their roll that they use for membership is their 1949 base roll. And so basically that band were the ones who are called the Old Settlers.
Okay.
And they voluntarily, before the Trail of Tears, relocated to the Arkansas area. The third group is actually, it's called Eastern Band of Cherokee, and they were the ones that somehow avoided the Trail of Tears and stayed in the eastern U.S. And they used the 1924 Baker Roll as their requirement to be a member.
Interesting. So basically what you've got with these groups is it was one nation at one point and then it split up. Is that right?
Correct. That's exactly correct. Yes.
Okay.
And you can only be a member of one of the 3 groups. You cannot be a member of all 3.
Fascinating. So the Trail of Tears, for people who aren't aware, took place between like 1830 and 1850, but it involved many different tribes, including the Cherokee at that point. And many of your group obviously the Cherokee Nation wound up in Oklahoma, right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So I was able to trace one of my lines. They originally started about North Carolina, Georgia border area. And we figured that she probably migrated with her family between 1838 and 1839. This would be my 4th great grandmother. Jenny Sequitchie is the name that she ended up with when she was in Oklahoma. But her Native American name was Ayasti. And so she and her family, I was able to trace them from the rolls before the Trail of Tears. One of the key rolls that is so helpful if you're doing research, trying to find your Trail of Tears ancestors, is using the Eastern Cherokee applications. They're part of the Guyon-Miller rolls.
Okay.
And those give all kinds of information. It's fantastic.
Now, where are these rolls accessible for people?
Sure. Oh, yeah. The Guyon-Miller rolls are at the National Archives. Also, they've all been digitized and they are available on Fold 3. And I believe that there are other locations you can find them as well.
Okay. So for some people, it's just a matter of getting a simple subscription. Obviously, a lot harder to get into the National Archives these days.
Exactly.
But nonetheless, sounds like a lot of information there.
It's fantastic. They provided information about grandparents, brothers, sisters, because what they were trying to do is they were trying to get the compensation that the U.S. government was going to provide to everyone who relocated. And so in order to do that, you had to fill out these applications. And so they had to give a lot of detail so that they could prove that they actually were on the Trail of Tears. And so each of these rolls, it's really interesting too. They cross-reference very well. The Dawes roll is the roll that you need to have an ancestor on in your direct line in order to be a member of the Cherokee Nation. And if you look on the Dawes roll, like for my great-grandmother, Nina, there's a whole list of other information on there that gives you kind of links to other sources. Her birth affidavit is listed on there. So you're going to get an idea of other records you can go chase, which is, as a genealogist, of course, that's fabulous.
Yeah, that's like the best stuff ever. So this is really interesting to me because I'm sure people are listening going, no, wait a minute, didn't you say at the beginning that the DNA proved you weren't a part of Cherokee Nation, yet you're still a member, yes?
Yes, that is true. So what happened was my family put in their membership applications before I even found out about DNA.
Sure.
And after my dad found out, he contacted the Cherokee Nation and said, look, I didn't realize this happened, and it was a DNA surprise. And they said, that doesn't matter at all, because we don't even look at DNA. You can't use DNA to prove membership anyway. What you need is the records. So it didn't matter at all to them.
Interesting. So there are government benefits also to being a member of these nations, yes?
Yes, there can be. I know that my dad has received some benefits, especially healthcare and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one benefit that I know that he's received. I know that there's more available if you're living down around Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, but I didn't grow up in that area. So most of my information just comes from the stories from my family.
Right. You just wanted to know your heritage and how that all ties together. Well, it's a fascinating thing for those of us who have not delved into this. And a lot of families throughout the country of all kinds of backgrounds have had it passed down that they had some Native American back there, and obviously DNA is helping to prove or disprove many of those stories from the past. But for those people who actually find connections, especially can specify down to something like one of these three tribes of Cherokees, sounds like there's a great deal of fantastic records waiting out there for you to get those generations back on your tree.
Absolutely. That's so true. It's interesting because even though the Indigenous American ethnicity didn't show up on my tests, I do have the DNA tests for two of my grandpa's siblings, and the percentage reflected of Indigenous American for them is exactly pretty spot on with what was reported for my great-grandmother.
Isn't that interesting? That's great stuff. She's Michelle Carroll. She's a researcher at Legacy Tree Genealogist, one of our great sponsors, and obviously a specialist in Cherokee research. And if you're interested in finding about your Native American ancestors, might be a great route to go. And thanks for sharing those records with us, Michelle.
Thanks so much. It was great talking to you.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert returns for another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, in 3 minutes. Genies, if you haven't done so yet, you've got to check out Ancestry.com's new storytelling creation center, Ancestry Stories. Their story builder allows you to create a story with 6 different slide types, including a title page, a photo display page, including stock pictures they provide, and documents. And you can write a summary. And with those photos, you can add motion, panning left to right or right to left. For now, these stories can only be created on your iPhone, but Android is still to come and can be saved to your ancestors' pages on your trees. You can then access via phone, and in time, it'll appear on your desktop. You can also share it with family members and friends, whether or not they subscribe to Ancestry.com. For the younger generation that wants stories in a quick and easy-to-consume form, you can't beat this. I've already shared a story with my family, and the reactions are remarkable. Try out these incredible new tools and share your new story creations on social media using hashtag #MyAncestryStory. Hey Genies, it's Fisher here, and my shiny new ExtremeGenes.com website has been described as having that new car smell. I love hearing that. Having been with you for over 8 years now, it felt like time to help out listeners and followers who need to know the basics of genealogical research, as well as how to understand your DNA test results, and to be able to put them to work for you, breaking down brick walls, identifying birth parents, locating new cousins who may have photos and information that can't be found anywhere else, and verifying your paper trails. Yes, DNA can do all that, and I can show you how. Check out the all-new ExtremeGenes.com website and download the free Genealogy Strategy Roadmap and the free DNA Starter Guide. Then, if you like what you see, you can take those next steps to sign up for the video courses that you can watch at your leisure. I'll take you through all the basics, step by step. Find out more now at ExtremeGenes.com.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
All right, we are back. I am back. David is back. It's Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. David, our first question today is from Marilee in New Rochelle, New York. And she says, guys, I just found out that one of my ancestors was a loyalist in the Revolution, which is not uncommon in Westchester County, New York.
Definitely not.
And supposedly lost everything. How do I find out what he lost? That's a great question, David.
Well, and being akin to having loyalist roots in Westchester County, New York, I can answer that question.
Okay.
And you don't have to go any further than Ancestry.com. They have a database that's entitled UK American Loyalist Claims 1776 to 1835. It's all indexed, and it comes from two sets of records. They have the Audit Office records. Now, there's Audit Office 12, which were about 50 or so bound volumes, all very well written, calligraphy, easy to read.
Wow.
And they were based from Audit Office 13, which are all the original documents. These include the memorials or the claims that were made by all of these individuals and families. So if your ancestor lost a yoke of oxen, his barn, 20 acres of land, all of his personal possessions that were seized by the American Army, it will be all detailed there. The catch of this is you may have had 800 pounds worth of value to your property. You were lucky if you got 100 pounds, because the British Crown, even though they were glad you were a loyal subject to the Crown, these Tories didn't get every penny back that they thought they were going to. And this is really kind of a sad story for some, because things that they end up losing are things like family Bibles, documents, anything that would have been maybe passed on that could have been in the family may have been burned and destroyed in the course of war. And of course, that's been going on for thousands of years. But the American Loyalist claims are great. You'll find them right online on Ancestry.com, and it's one of the best collections for Revolutionary War research for loyalists that you can find.
Well, and it probably is a great way for you to find out if you had an ancestor who was a loyalist. Maybe you suspect somebody, and you can pop a name in there and maybe just the surname and see if the first name comes up, and you might prove what you're looking for. It is amazing how much you lose when you're on the wrong side of a war.
That's true.
I had a brother-in-law of one of my ancestors who took his wife, who would have been some kind of seventh grade aunt or something like that, and wound up in Nova Scotia. And, of course, they lost everything that they left behind in New York State. And, of course, all the association with people they'd known and loved. And then they had to start fresh. Nova Scotia was not really well settled back at that time. And so the British had to provide them with things by which they could build their homes and claim new land. And really, they were just starting their lives all over again.
And that's true. In a lot of the records you find in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, the Crown land grant records will often say, from New York or from Massachusetts or from another colony. And sometimes it goes down to saying exactly where, but with that and a combination of the loyalist claims, providing your ancestor put in for a claim, that will give you the backstory, how they were loyal to the crown, if they had served in the French and Indian War, if they were a merchant, anything they did to support the British crown in North America, it's all laid right out there, like they're writing a letter to the future.
Isn't that amazing? There's great stuff there. So the bad news for them was bad news, but for us it's really good because it leaves a lot of details about the lives of some of these people. So great stuff and a great question there. Thanks so much for that, Marilee. And we've got another one coming up when we return with more of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show in 3 minutes. All right, question number 2 this week on Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. This is from Lyle in Westbrook, Maine. And he says, Fisher David, my grandfather was a private pilot in the 1940s and 1950s. Any idea how I might find if his old Mooney airplane is still out there? That is a really good question. Dave, do you have any pilots in your family?
No, but the person who taught me history used to fly a Sopwith Camel in the 20s. He was a barnstormer and used to also do aerial photography in the 20s when someone else flew, and he was strapped to the wing with a camera.
I can't even imagine that. My dad was a private pilot back in the 1950s and 60s. And actually, when I was a preschooler, we had a private plane. And it was what they call a tail dragger. It was a Cessna 170. And so, Lyle, here is the thing that you should do. And in fact, I did this recently myself, and it paid off. If you have a picture of your grandfather with the plane, you want to look for the call sign that's along the side. Now, I'm assuming it's an American plane, which means that call sign should begin with the letter N, and it's usually 4 numbers and then a letter again at the end. You can look that up online on the strangest site you could ever imagine, a place called Google. And yes, I know, Dave, I know it's a shocking thing, but if you just put in airplane call sign and put that number in there, you might be surprised to find a photograph of your grandfather's private plane, just like I did of my dad's plane from the 1950s that I used to fly in. And I'll tell you, it looks great. It's been freshly painted. It's a different color and all that. But to just see that old plane with that call sign on it is an amazing thing to me. And people have asked me, well, why would you even know something like that? Well, other than the fact I have pictures of it, that was one of those early numbers that was ingrained in my head, before I even started school. And it's never left me. So, when I wanted to look and see if I might be able to find something out there on that, I popped it in there and pulled it right up. So really, it's a great suggestion for anybody who has a private pilot and a private plane in their background that they may want to research. That's the one thing about pilots, Dave. They love taking photographs of their own aircraft and putting it out there. They go to air shows, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like having a sports car with wings.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comparison. I mean, when I was really little, a preschooler, there was nothing more fun in my life than when Dad would say, hey, we're going to the airport. We're going flying today. And we'd go out there and he'd hop me in and put the headset on, and I could talk to him through the headset. And there's a certain smell to the interior of a private plane that I've always associated with that experience. We still have some old home movies of it and that type of thing. And so, Lyle, hopefully you can make a little headway with this and find out where the planes. I'll tell you what, my brother is a pilot to this very day, flies for American Airlines, and he actually wanted to go out and see if he could find that plane so he could buy it and buy it back into the family after almost 60 years. Isn't that crazy?
Well, now's your chance.
Yeah, I guess so. One record says it's in Maryland and another says it's in Michigan. So I'd have to take a look and see if it's been fairly recently sold and where it is right now. But that's kind of public information. It's out there all over the place that you can find. So take a look at your pictures, Lyle, and see if you can't track down a good photo of what your grandfather's plane looks like today, and hopefully discover that it's still out there. Wouldn't it be fun, Dave, to go out, track it down, and get a ride in something like that after all these these years?
Sounds like a thrill.
It really would be. All right. Well, thanks for the question, Lyle. Thank you, David, for coming on once again, because that is our final question this week on Ask Us Anything.
Well, thank you, and I will talk to you next week.
Looking forward to it, sir. Well, thanks so much for joining us for the show this week. Thanks once again to Krista Cowan from our sponsors over at Ancestry and Michelle Carroll from our sponsors over at Legacy Tree for coming on with some incredible stuff this week. If you missed any of the show, of course, catch the podcast on Apple Media, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, wherever fine podcasts are found. Talk to you next week, and remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.